Exceptional work on this restructuring proposal. Your insights have positioned us perfectly for the acquisition. The senior partner's hand lingered on Derek's shoulder like they were celebrating a championship win. The handshake seemed to stretch on forever, firm and congratulatory. Derek settled into his chair with this easy confidence that made something twist in my stomach. 19 people packed into that conference room. Every single one of them staring at him like he'd just saved the firm from bankruptcy. Perhaps he had, if you were listening to him tell it. If you were asking anyone present in that precise moment. But I understood the actual truth. For months. That's the time I'd invested reconstructing their acquisition framework from the foundation up. 4 months of 18-hour workdays while Derek disappeared every Friday at noon for his standing racquetball games. 4 months of calculating projections until my vision blurred and my mind went numb. Of discovering the structural flaws in their merger approach that were destroying value faster than anyone cared to acknowledge. Of designing a methodical blueprint to halt the damage and genuinely reverse their trajectory. The calculations belonged to me. Every single analysis, the forecasts indicating which targets to abandon and which to pursue aggressively, mine. The due diligence frameworks that would prevent them from another catastrophic deal, entirely mine. I'd even created custom dashboards so the partners could track progress without drowning in complexity. Derek had provided exactly 3 contributions. His signature on the cover page, his presence at scheduled meetings, and his talent for arriving punctually. I really appreciate the recognition. Derek's voice carried this modest undertone to it, like he was attempting not to boast but couldn't suppress his pride. I counted silently. 5 seconds passed, then 10, then 15. He never spoke my name, never shifted his gaze toward where I sat. The senior partner continued addressing the next executive, still discussing Derek's analytical brilliance. Someone else mentioned his strategic foresight. Another voice praised how remarkable it was that he'd managed to spot vulnerabilities that their entire leadership structure had somehow missed. Derek simply nodded along, absorbing everything, drinking in recognition for work he couldn't have completed if someone physically guided his hands across the keyboard. I remained in my seat, fingers interlaced in my lap, observing this entire performance unfold like I'd stepped outside myself, like I was viewing it happen to a stranger, except it was happening to me. The meeting concluded. People began collecting their materials, exchanging handshakes, making casual conversation about dinner reservations and weekend travel. Derek rose, adjusting his tie, chatting with one of the partners about some vineyard he'd visited recently. I reached up and removed my consultant badge from my blazer. The plastic felt warm from resting against my chest for the previous 3 hours. I placed it deliberately on the table, right beside the presentation binder someone had left behind. Then I stood up. I'm finished here. Effective immediately. The room didn't fall silent dramatically. That's not an accurate description. But conversations stopped mid-sentence. The partner Derek was speaking with glanced toward me with this bewildered expression like I'd suddenly started reciting poetry in a foreign language. My direct supervisor, Lawrence, moved a step closer. What are you saying? I'm resigning. Right now. I'll provide formal documentation before close of business today, but consider this my official notice. Derek finally acknowledged me. And I caught it there in his features, this flash of alarm that he attempted to mask almost instantly. Let's discuss this privately, Lawrence said, already heading toward the exit. There's nothing to discuss. I walked out. Simply turned and departed while they all remained frozen, attempting to process what had just occurred. I didn't rush, didn't make a scene, just maintained a steady pace through the building's corridors, reached my vehicle in the parking structure and drove to my apartment. My name is Eileen Carrington, and that was the day I stopped permitting other people to claim what belonged to me. Lawrence started messaging within 30 minutes. Then the messages evolved into phone calls. I ignored the first several, but by the 19th attempt, I answered just to end the harassment. You're being irrational, he said. No greeting. No inquiry about my well-being. Just immediately telling me I was mistaken. He was acknowledging praise on behalf of the team. That's standard leadership behavior. Leadership, I repeated. Derek's considered a leader now. You understand my point. He was representing the work you both contributed to. Lawrence, name one specific thing Derek did on that project besides correcting typos in the executive summary. Silence on his end, long enough that I genuinely thought we'd been disconnected. It's more nuanced than that, he finally managed. Derek has established relationships with those partners. They have confidence in him. That's valuable in these contexts. So I complete the work and he receives the applause because people prefer his personality. That's not my meaning. Then clarify your meaning. More silence, then sleep on this decision. Don't do anything impulsive. We can address this tomorrow. I ended the call. Here's what people fail to mention about resigning in a moment like that. The remainder of your day feels profoundly disorienting. I returned to my apartment and sat on my couch for 90 minutes. Not streaming anything, not reading anything, simply sitting there reviewing every previous instance something similar had happened. Smaller iterations of it. Derek appropriating my suggestions in team discussions and rephrasing them like they just materialized in his mind. Derek's name appearing prominently on strategy documents I'd authored 95% of. Derek receiving invitations to executive dinners while I remained late completing deliverables that displayed both our names. I convinced myself it was inconsequential, that the work demonstrated itself, that eventually people would recognize who was genuinely generating results. But they hadn't recognized anything. They just continued celebrating Derek. That evening I refreshed my professional networks. Not with some vindictive statement about what transpired. Nothing resembling that. Just quietly updated my credentials, my competencies, the specific projects I'd executed. I ensured every restructuring framework I'd developed was documented under my name with detailed information about the outcomes. Then I went to sleep. The following morning I woke to 4 messages from people I'd never encountered. Managing directors at different private equity firms. They'd noticed my profile changes. They'd learned about the acquisition framework I'd constructed, and they wanted to know if I was available to assist with their troubled portfolio companies. Initially, I assumed perhaps Lawrence had directed them my way as some kind of reconciliation gesture. But when I spoke with the first one, he explained he'd been attempting to locate me for months after learning about my methodology through industry channels. We have a comparable challenge, he informed me. Portfolio company that scaled too rapidly, hemorrhaging capital in unsuitable markets. I heard you're the person who understands how to repair this type of situation. Where did you hear that? People communicate. Your framework's been circulating in our networks. Everyone wants to identify who created it. Not Derek's name. Before I continue further, thank you for listening to my story. It means everything to have you here. If you're listening while commuting, working, or just taking a moment for yourself, I see you. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from. I'd love to know where in the world you are. Now back to the story. By the conclusion of that first week, I had 9 different investment firms requesting me to consult on their failing investments. They didn't want someone to simply apply temporary fixes. They wanted someone who could examine a broken acquisition strategy and reconstruct it from first principles. That was my specialization, the skill I'd refined over years of repairing other people's disasters. I started accepting projects. 1 assignment initially, then 2 simultaneously, then 6. The work was demanding but in a transformed way compared to before. Instead of investing months on a single project while someone else received celebration for it, I was investing weeks on each one, earning what I should have been making annually, and receiving gratitude from the actual decision makers who knew precisely who'd completed the work. Lawrence kept attempting to contact me less frequently as days progressed, but still he'd send messages asking if I'd reconsider, stating they genuinely needed me back, that operations weren't functioning properly without me. I didn't respond. Derek attempted exactly once. A single text message that read, "I hope there's no animosity. You're genuinely talented and I'm confident you'll achieve remarkable things." I blocked his contact. 7 weeks after I departed that partner meeting, my circumstances had completely transformed. I was collaborating with 14 different investment portfolios, earning more monthly than I'd previously thought achievable, receiving recognition by name when I entered meetings. People listened when I spoke. Nobody interrupted me to rephrase what I just articulated. Nobody's name appeared on my deliverables except mine. And then Lawrence's contact information appeared on my screen again. Different timing, this instance late evening on a Wednesday. I almost ignored it, but curiosity made me answer. "We need assistance." His voice sounded strained, exhausted. "The acquisition pipeline's collapsing worse than before. The partners want you back. State your terms." I let that hang in the air for a moment, imagined him in his office, probably pacing, probably desperate. What happened to your brilliant strategist? I asked. The pause that followed communicated everything. He couldn't reproduce the outcomes. Reproduce? That's a fascinating word selection, Lawrence. Listen, I recognize how this appears. Do you? Because from my perspective, it appears Derek accepted applause for work he couldn't actually execute, and now you're in crisis because you believed his performance. The partners are withdrawing support. They're asking specifically for you. They want to understand why you're not directing the implementation. Of course they were, because partners aren't foolish. They can distinguish between someone who comprehends the strategy and someone who's merely presenting it. Because he didn't create it, I stated. That's why he couldn't reproduce the outcomes. You can't reproduce something you never comprehended initially. Lawrence made this sound, half exhale, half groan. Please. We're losing everything. The partners are panicking. I'm being instructed to resolve this, or they're replacing the entire team. Your framework was supposed to rescue us, but without you here to implement it, everything's deteriorating. My framework is perfectly sound. Your execution is the problem. Then return and execute it. Whatever you require, whatever it demands. I sat down on my couch, phone pressed against my ear, thinking about all those instances I'd observed Derek receiving praise for my work. All those instances I'd suppressed my frustration and told myself to simply maintain focus and produce excellent results, that eventually someone would notice. I'll consult, I said, but I'm not returning as an employee. I operate independently now. Acceptable, whatever you need. State your terms. 5 times my previous salary, and that's the consulting rate, not annual compensation. You're paying me what I'm worth presently, not what you arbitrarily decided I was worth previously. I heard him exhale. Agreed. Anything else? Yes. I present directly to the partners. No intermediaries, no supervisors, no one else's name on my work. Just mine. Absolutely, of course. And Derek attends that meeting while I present. Silence. Lawrence, did you hear me? I heard you. I just don't comprehend why that's necessary. Because I want him to observe while I explain every single element he claimed as his own. Every decision point he accepted applause for, every calculation he couldn't reproduce. I want him sitting there while the same people who praised him realize precisely what happened. That's the condition. Accept it or I disconnect, and you can resolve this independently. More silence, then I'll arrange it. We scheduled the meeting for 3 weeks out. That provided me time to complete my current projects and prepare for what was approaching. Those 3 weeks felt longer than the previous 7 combined. I kept working with my other clients, kept building my reputation, but part of my consciousness was already planning what I'd articulate in that room, how I'd guide them through the strategy in a manner that made it crystalline who'd built it. I wasn't anxious exactly, more like concentrated, the way you feel before something significant that you know you can manage. The night before the meeting I couldn't sleep. Not from nervousness, from anticipation. I lay there in the darkness thinking about Derek's expression when the partners had praised him. That relaxed confidence, that effortless acceptance of recognition he hadn't earned. Tomorrow that was going to change. I arrived 20 minutes early. The building appeared identical to how it had 7 weeks ago, but entering it felt completely different. Previously I'd been an employee hoping someone would notice my contributions. This time I was a retained expert they were paying premium rates to rescue their disaster. Lawrence met me in the reception area. He appeared worse than he'd sounded on the phone. Shadows beneath his eyes, shirt not as pressed as usual. Thank you for coming, he said. The partners are already assembling. They're very eager to hear from you. Is Derek here? He's here. I informed him he needed to attend as part of the transition process, and he agreed. He didn't have much option. We walked through the building toward the same room where the partner meeting had occurred. My footsteps echoed in the corridor. I wasn't wearing the same outfit as previously. I'd selected something sharper, more expensive, the kind of ensemble that communicated I wasn't requesting permission anymore. The room was occupied when we entered. 19 people again, but different faces this time. The full partnership, the investors who'd been withdrawing support, senior leadership I recognized from my time working there. And Derek, positioned near the back, appearing like he wished he could vanish into the wallpaper. Our eyes connected for half a second. He looked away first. Everyone, this is Eileen Carrington, Lawrence announced. She'll be walking us through the acquisition strategy and its implementation. Several partners nodded. One of the investors, the same one who'd praised Derek, stood up and shook my hand. "We've heard considerable things about you," he said. "People in the industry speak very highly of your work." "I appreciate that," I said. Everyone located their seats. I moved to the front of the room, connected my laptop to the projection system, and opened my presentation. 4 months of work, distilled into a format that would require 4 hours to properly explain. I didn't rush, didn't abbreviate. I walked them through every single component of it. Started with the initial assessment, how I'd identified which acquisition targets were consuming resources without generating returns, showed them the analysis I'd conducted on their deal pipeline, the specific points where decisions had been made without adequate diligence, explained exactly how I'd rebuilt their framework from first principles. "This section here," I said, indicating a particularly complex valuation model, required understanding the regulatory environment in 6 different jurisdictions. I invested 3 weeks just researching compliance requirements because one error here would have meant legal exposure worth tens of millions. One of the partners leaned forward. "Derek, did you assist with this section?" I didn't look at Derek. Kept my focus on the partner. "I worked on this section independently. It required specific knowledge of cross-border transaction law." Derek remained quiet. I progressed to the next part. The risk assessment frameworks, the sector-by-sector breakdown of where to withdraw and where to invest more substantially. The timeline for implementation that would minimize disruption while maximizing recovery. The critical insight here, I explained, was recognizing that the problem wasn't the acquisition strategy itself. It was the target selection and integration approach. You'd been pursuing companies that required 5 to 7 years of operational transformation before profitability, but you were expecting returns in 24 months. That disconnect was destroying you. The same investor who'd praised Derek was taking notes now, genuinely engaged, asking questions about specific data points. "How did you identify which targets had the longer transformation timeline?" he asked. Historical analysis of comparable transactions in the same sectors, cross-referenced with operational performance data and management quality assessments. It required about 60 hours of research, but once the pattern became apparent, the recommendations followed naturally. Another partner spoke up. "And the implementation plan? How confident are you that this will succeed?" "The model's fundamentally sound. The issue you've been experiencing is execution. The strategy requires someone who comprehends not just what to do, but why each step matters and how they interconnect. You can't follow it like instructions. You have to understand the underlying logic." "Which is why it wasn't functioning," one of the investors said slowly, realization forming. "We assumed we could just follow the plan, but without understanding the reasoning behind it. It collapses the moment you encounter an unexpected variable," I finished. "Which you did repeatedly." I glanced at Derek then, just briefly. He was staring at his notepad, jaw clenched. The presentation continued. Hour 2, hour 3, hour 4. I answered every question, clarified every confusion, walked them through scenarios and contingencies and alternative approaches if certain assumptions proved incorrect. By the conclusion, the energy in the room had completely shifted. The investors who'd been prepared to withdraw were discussing moving forward. The partners were asking about implementation schedules. Everyone was focused, engaged, understanding exactly what needed to happen. "This is exceptional work," the lead investor said. "I have to ask, when we were here 7 weeks ago, we were informed this was Derek's strategy. Can you clarify the collaboration process?" The room became very still. I looked at Derek, made sure everyone observed me looking at him. Then I turned back to the investor. There was no collaboration. I built this strategy independently over 4 months. Derek's contribution was attending the presentation where I explained it to you. You could sense the shift. Not dramatic, no one gasped or anything theatrical. But people repositioned in their seats differently, exchanged glances, reassessed. The investor who'd shaken Derek's hand 7 weeks ago looked over at him now. "Is that accurate?" Derek opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "I mean, we functioned as a team." "Answer the question," one of the partners said. "Did you develop this strategy?" "I was involved in the project." "That's not what I asked." The silence extended. Derek's face had flushed red. Not from anger, from embarrassment, from being cornered before people whose respect he'd been borrowing without earning. "No," he finally said. "I didn't develop it." Nobody spoke for a moment. Then Lawrence cleared his throat. Derek, I think we need to have a separate conversation about this. I think we all need to have that conversation, the lead investor said. His tone wasn't angry, just factual, like he was recalculating everything he'd assumed he knew. We made investment decisions based on our assessment of your team's capabilities. If that assessment was inaccurate, we need to understand why. Derek shifted in his seat. I never explicitly stated I created it myself. You all just assumed. You accepted praise for it, I interrupted, kept my voice level. When that investor told you it was brilliant work, you thanked him. You didn't correct him. You didn't mention my name. You allowed everyone in that room to believe you'd done something you hadn't done. It was a team effort. Stop saying that, one of the partners cut him off. Older man, calculating eyes. We've heard enough. Eileen, let's discuss moving forward with implementation. What do you need from us? I spent the next 40 minutes outlining exactly what had to occur. Which targets to abandon immediately, which teams needed restructuring, how to communicate the changes to portfolio management without causing alarm, what metrics to track weekly versus monthly, who needed to be making which decisions. They listened, genuinely listened, asked intelligent questions, took notes. Derek sat there the entire time, not contributing, not speaking unless directly addressed, which he wasn't. When the meeting finally concluded, people approached to thank me individually, shook my hand, told me they were relieved to have me involved, asked when I could begin the implementation process. Derek departed without saying goodbye to anyone. Lawrence caught up with me as I was packing up my laptop. That was intense, he said. That was honest. I know, and you're right about all of it. He rubbed his temples. I should have paid closer attention to who was actually producing the work. I let the presentation skills fool me. As you did. We're going to make changes. Derek's being transferred to a different role. Something where he can't claim ownership of other people's work. That's your decision to make. I'm just here to fix the acquisition problem. Still, I want you to know we're taking this seriously. I zipped up my laptop case. Good. Send me the implementation timeline and I'll build out the week-by-week plan. We start in 4 days. Over the next 10 weeks, I worked with them on execution. Not as an employee, as an independent expert they were paying premium rates to access. I came in 3 times weekly, met with the relevant teams, checked progress, adjusted strategies when real-world variables proved different than projected. The turnaround started demonstrating results within 6 weeks. Targets they'd abandoned stopped consuming resources. Targets they concentrated on started generating the returns I'd projected. The investors stopped discussing withdrawal and started discussing additional capital commitments. Derek, meanwhile, got transferred to a different division. Something involving internal process optimization where he'd have clear deliverables and no ability to claim ownership of collaborative work. I heard through people still working there that he'd requested a transfer to a different office within 5 months. Couldn't handle observing the firm recover using a strategy everyone now knew he hadn't created. I didn't feel remorse about that. But here's the thing nobody tells you about moments like this. The satisfaction isn't just in proving you were correct. It's in building something that endures beyond the confrontation. Because while I was implementing the turnaround for my former firm, my other consulting work kept expanding. The 14 portfolios became 22, then 31. Investment firms started reaching out before their companies hit crisis situations, wanting preventive assessments, wanting someone to examine their acquisition plans before they committed hundreds of millions to strategies that wouldn't succeed. I started declining projects. Not because I couldn't manage them, but because I realized I didn't have to accept everything anymore. I could select work that interested me, work with people who respected expertise, work where my name remained attached to what I built. 8 months after that presentation where Derek sat in silence, I was working with clients in 12 countries, making more in 6 weeks than I'd made annually at my former job, getting invited to speak at industry conferences about restructuring strategies and acquisition frameworks. People knew my name now. When I entered meetings, they knew exactly who I was and why I was there. And Derek? Last I heard, he accepted a position at a substantially smaller firm in a different region. Somewhere his reputation hadn't followed him. Somewhere he could start fresh without everyone knowing he'd once accepted applause for work he couldn't reproduce. I didn't keep tabs on him deliberately. Information just filtered back through mutual contacts. The industry is smaller than people realize. One afternoon about 10 months after everything transpired, I received a message from someone I didn't recognize. Managing director at a firm I'd never worked with. I hope this doesn't come across inappropriately, the message read, but I wanted you to know that we were about to hire someone for a senior strategy position, and during the reference checks, we heard some concerning things about attribution issues. Just wanted to say thank you for being public about what happened. It helped us avoid making a problematic hire. I stared at that message for a long time. Then I wrote back, who were you about to hire? Someone named Derek. He interviewed exceptionally well, but when we investigated deeper, the story started unraveling. So that's how it functioned. Not just the immediate consequences of being exposed in that boardroom, but the long-term reality that in specialized industries, people communicate, they remember, they share information when it matters. Derek's ability to coast on other people's work had ended that day in the presentation. Not just at one firm but everywhere that reputation mattered. I didn't ruin his career. He'd done that himself by choosing to accept praise he hadn't earned. I just ensured the truth was visible. My consulting work continued expanding. By the conclusion of the first year, I'd worked with 47 different portfolios. Some short-term assessments, some long-term implementations, all of them paying me rates that reflected actual value, not whatever budget calculation someone in leadership had decided was appropriate. I hired assistants eventually. Not employees, other independent experts who specialized in areas I didn't. We collaborated on larger projects, always with clear attribution for who contributed what. Nobody's name appeared on work they hadn't done. Nobody received praise for someone else's thinking. It sounds simple, but apparently it's revolutionary. The firm where everything transpired stabilized completely. Their acquisition strategy succeeded. They recovered their losses and started growing sustainably. Lawrence sent me a message about 14 months after that confrontation presentation, saying the partners had specifically mentioned my work in their annual review. Asked if I wanted to be listed as a strategic advisor. I said yes. With my full name, with accurate descriptions of what I'd actually done. Derek never reached out. Not to apologize, not to explain, not to acknowledge anything. And honestly, I preferred it that way. Some people never develop the self-awareness to understand what they did wrong. They just move forward and hope nobody remembers. But people remember. 2 years after I departed that partner meeting, I was keynoting at a major industry event, discussing restructuring strategies and sustainable growth models. 800 people in the audience. Questions afterward that demonstrated people had genuinely understood the material. As I was departing the stage, someone stopped me. Older man, investor type. That presentation you gave 2 years ago, he said. The one where you exposed the credit theft. I was in the room. I remembered him. One of the partners who'd asked Derek directly if he'd developed the strategy. I wanted to tell you something, he continued. After that meeting, our partnership implemented new policies about attribution and recognition. We require detailed contribution documentation on major projects now. We verify claims during presentations. What you did changed how we operate. That's good, I said. That's genuinely good. It wasn't comfortable at the time, but it needed to happen. So thank you. He walked away before I could respond. I stood there in the empty auditorium, thinking about that moment when I'd placed my consultant badge on the table and departed. How it had felt like destroying something I'd built. How I hadn't known what would come next. But what came next was better. Not easier, better. More honest, more sustainable, more mine. 3 years in, my consulting practice was established enough that I could afford to be selective. I accepted projects that challenged me, declined work that felt repetitive, started mentoring younger professionals who were dealing with similar credit theft situations, helping them document their work and advocate for themselves. Some of them asked if they should resign like I did. Only if you're prepared to build something yourself, I told them. Don't resign to make a point. Resign because you know you can do better somewhere else. Not everyone was ready for that. Some stayed and fought within their organizations. Some moved to different firms. Some started their own practices like I had. But they all learned the same lesson I'd learned. Your work has to be undeniably yours. Document it. Make sure people know who built what. Don't wait for someone to notice. Make it visible. Derek's name stopped appearing in industry conversations. He'd become one of those people who'd had a moment of visibility and then faded into the background, working somewhere, doing something but not making waves, not receiving recognition. Me. I built exactly what I'd wanted. A practice where I got paid what I was worth, where my name remained attached to my thinking, where I could choose who I worked with and what problems I solved. The revenge wasn't destroying Derek's career. That was just a consequence of his own choices catching up with him. The real revenge was building something so successful that it made departing from that moment look like the best decision I'd ever made. 4 years after I walked out, I was working with clients on 3 continents, had established a reputation as the person you called when acquisition strategies were failing, and was earning more than I'd ever imagined possible when I was sitting in that conference room watching Derek accept praise for my work. I received an invitation to speak at an executive summit. The topic was professional integrity and attribution in corporate strategy. I accepted. During my presentation, I told the story. Not with names, not with identifying details, but I told it. About watching someone accept applause for work they hadn't done, about walking out, about building something better. Afterward, 7 people approached me separately. Each one told me a similar story. Each one had faced the same situation. Someone taking credit for their work, someone benefiting from their thinking without acknowledgement. What did you do? I asked each of them. 3 had stayed and fought. 2 had left and started their own practices. 1 had moved to a competitor. 1 was still trying to decide. The one who was still deciding asked me, "Do you ever regret it? Walking out like that?" I thought about it for a moment. About Derek sitting in that conference room while I explained every element he'd claimed as his own. About the firm calling me back at 5 times my salary. About building a practice that was entirely mine. Not even once, I said. Because here's what I learned. Your work has value. Real, tangible value. And if the people around you can't see that, if they'd rather celebrate someone who presents well over someone who produces results, then they don't deserve access to what you can do. Walking out wasn't about punishing them. It was about refusing to participate in a system that devalued my contributions. It was about recognizing that I had options, that I could build something better, that I didn't need their validation to succeed. The revenge, if you want to call it that, was never about Derek failing. It was about me succeeding so dramatically that it became obvious what they'd lost when I left. 5 years after that conference room moment, I was invited back to speak at my former firm. They were hosting an internal event about professional development and career growth. Lawrence had reached out personally. "I know it's unconventional," he wrote, "but I think it would be valuable for our people to hear your story. About building a successful independent practice, about recognizing your worth, about advocating for yourself." I almost declined. Then I thought about the younger professionals there, the ones who might be experiencing what I'd experienced, watching someone else take credit for their work and wondering if they should just accept it. I accepted the invitation. The day of the event, I walked into that same building. It felt different now. I wasn't an employee hoping to be noticed. I was a successful independent consultant who'd been invited to share expertise. The conference room was packed. I recognized some faces, but most were new hires who'd joined after I left. I told the story. The real story with real details. About the presentation where Derek took credit for my work. About placing my badge on the table and walking out. About the uncertainty that followed and then the unexpected success. About building something that was entirely mine. When I finished, the room was silent for a moment. Then someone started clapping. Then someone else. Then everyone. Afterward, a young woman approached me. She looked like she'd been crying. "That happened to me last month," she said. My supervisor presented my analysis as his own. "I've been trying to figure out what to do." "What do you want to do?" I asked. "I want to leave, but I'm scared. What if I can't make it work? What if I need the stability?" I handed her my card. "Document everything you do. Make sure there's a clear record of your contributions. Build your network. Update your profiles. And when you're ready, when you know you can do better elsewhere, then leave. But don't leave out of anger. Leave because you're moving towards something better." She took my card, nodded, wiped her eyes. "Thank you." 6 months later, she reached out. She'd left the firm, started consulting independently, and had just landed her 3rd client. "Your advice worked," she wrote. "I documented everything, built my reputation, and when I left, I had offers waiting. I'm making more than I ever did there, and my name is on everything I produce." That message meant more to me than any speaking fee or consulting contract. Because it meant the cycle was changing. It meant people were learning that they didn't have to accept having their work stolen. That they had options. That they could build something better. Derek? I heard he eventually left the industry entirely. Took a position in corporate training, somewhere his inability to produce original strategic work wouldn't matter. Somewhere he could present other people's materials without claiming them as his own. I never spoke to him again. Never needed to. The confrontation in that conference room had said everything that needed to be said. 7 years after I walked out, my consulting practice had evolved into something I'd never anticipated. I had a small team of independent consultants who collaborated on major projects. We had clients in 18 countries. We were known as the people you called when conventional strategies had failed and you needed someone who could think differently. And every project, every deliverable, every presentation had clear attribution. Everyone's name appeared on the work they'd actually done. Nobody got praised for someone else's thinking. It sounds simple, but in an industry where credit theft was common, where presentation skills often mattered more than analytical ability, it was revolutionary. I still remember that moment in the conference room sometimes. Watching Derek accept praise that belonged to me. Feeling that twist in my stomach, that combination of anger and humiliation and disbelief. But I also remember the moment I placed my badge on the table. The moment I stood up and said I'm done here. The moment I chose myself over stability, over comfort, over the familiar dysfunction of watching someone else benefit from my work. That moment changed everything. Not because it destroyed Derek's career, though it certainly impacted it. Not because it proved I was right, though it did. But because it proved to me that I could walk away from something that devalued me and build something better. The revenge was never about making Derek fail. It was about making myself succeed so completely that walking away looked like the most strategic decision I'd ever made. Thank you so much for listening to this whole story. If it resonated with you, if it reminded you of something in your own life, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. And if you haven't already, please hit that like button and subscribe. It helps more people find these stories, more people who might need to hear that walking away from people who don't value you isn't giving up. It's choosing yourself. All right. Thanks again for being here.